Sexual intercourse began in 1963, which was rather late for me, between the end of the Chatterley ban and the Beatles' first LP. Up till then there'd only been a sort of bargaining, a wrangle for a ring, a shame that started at 16 and spread to everything. Then all at once the quarrel sank. Everyone felt the same, and every life became a brilliant breaking of the bank, a quite unlosable game. So life was never better than in 1963, though just too late for me, between the end of the Chatterley ban and the Beatles' first LP.
That was Alex Jennings reading Annus Mirabilis by Philip Larkin. A witty poem for sure, but like everything Larkin wrote, it also provokes a thought or two. It can also be quite robust in his use of words, and we'll be including one of his best-known poems, which makes use of some very ripe language later in the programme. But next, a very different poem, which shows off his considerable range from light to dark, and from cynicism to vulnerability. This is Larkin devotee Andrew Motion reading Aubade.
I work all day and get half drunk at night. Waking at 4 to soundless dark, I stare. In time, the curtain edges will grow light. Till then, I see what's really always there. Unresting death, a whole day nearer now, making all thought impossible, but how and where and when I shall myself die. Arid interrogation, yet the dread of dying and being dead flashes afresh to hold and horrify. The mind blanks at the glare, not in remorse, the good not done, the love not given, time torn off unused, nor wretchedly because an only life can take so long to climb clear of its wrong beginnings and may never, but at the total emptiness forever, the sure extinction that we travel to and shall be lost in always. Not to be here, not to be anywhere, and soon, nothing more terrible, nothing more true. This is a special way of being afraid no trick dispels. Religion used to try, that vast, moth-eaten musical brocade created to pretend we never die, and specious stuff that says no rational being can fear a thing it will not feel, not seeing that this is what we fear. No sight, no sound, no touch or taste or smell, nothing to think with, nothing to love or link with, the anaesthetic from which none come round. And so it stays just on the edge of vision, a small, unfocused blur, a standing chill that slows each impulse down to indecision. Most things may never happen. This one will, and realization of it rages out in furnace fear when we are caught without people or drink. Courage is no good. It means not scaring others. Being brave lets no one off the grave. Death is no different whined at than withstood. Slowly, light strengthens, and the room takes shape. It stands plain as a wardrobe. What we know, have always known, know that we can't escape, yet can't accept. One side will have to go. Meanwhile, telephones crouch, getting ready to ring in locked-up offices, and all the uncaring, intricate, rented world begins to rouse. The sky is white as clay, with no sun. Work has to be done. Postmen, like doctors, go from house to house.
Beautiful and chilling. Aubade. requested by Stephen Albans, John A. Cook, Margaret W., Chris Moss and Peter Ashdown. We're treating you to a medley of Larkin poems in this programme for a reason. Although he was born in Coventry, it's on the streets of Hull where Philip Larkin's literary legacy is truly alive. As this year's European City of Culture, Hull will be celebrating all its artistic giants, and the man who put in the hours at Hull University's library from 1955 until his death in 1985 has a deserved place amongst Britain's finest 20th century poets. When I went to Hull University as a callow youth, Philip Larkin was the sub-warden of Needler, my hall of residence, and I've since described his avoiding all contact with students, disappearing at the end of meals in a huff of tweed. In a recent poem of mine, an homage to Annus Mirabilis and Aubade, and including words and images from both, I imagined an unlikely scene that took place in Needler Hall. Woken at dawn to the sound of Bechet's clarinet coming from his room on the floor above, as the door opens and he creeps down the stairs. The flop of moth-eaten brocade slippers along the corridor, the knock, the "come in." He stands in the doorway, plain as a wardrobe. "Thought you might be able to help." He stays just on the edge of vision, an unfocused blur, a standing chill. There's no escape. The curtain edges grow light and the room takes shape. "Work has to be done. What year was the Beatles' first LP?" 1963, I mumble. "A-B-B, A-B, excellent." And he is gone. The sky is white as clay, with no sun. We did have contact after I left university, and his letters, though few, were kind and encouraging. One in particular I treasure, his response to a booklet of poems I sent him called Unlucky for Some, which ended alarmingly, "Many thanks for your kind thought in sending me the book, which I found splendidly depressing." We're going to be talking to other poets about their relationship with Philip Larkin and hearing your Larkin requests throughout. The Scottish poet Douglas Dunn was a student at Hull too, and ended up working in the library with Larkin.
I first met him in the summer of 1967 when I was a student, and I worked in the university library during the summer vacation. The following year I got to know him better, and he began to come round to my wife's and I's apartment for drinks and then for dinner. And then after my first book, Terry Street, came out in 1969, got to know him even better. My wife and I both liked him very much indeed. A very reticent man in many ways, a very witty man. He could make people laugh, and he liked people to make him laugh. The Explosion. It is a favourite poem of mine, and I can remember that he sent me a proof copy before it appeared in a magazine, and he would sometimes do that. And I was very much taken with the poem then. It's a poem about an industrial catastrophe in mining, uncharacteristic subject for Philip, and it reads almost as if it rhymes, but it doesn't rhyme. It's simply that the metre is so subtle and so sustained, it gives the impression of musicality. On the day of the explosion, shadows pointed towards the pit head. In the sun the slag heap slept. Down the lane came men in pit boots, coughing oath-heads talk and pipe smoke, shouldering off the freshened silence. One chased after rabbits, lost them, came back with a nest of lark's eggs, showed them, lodged them in the grasses. So they passed in beards and moleskins, fathers, brothers, nicknames, laughter, through the tall gates standing open. At noon there came a tremor. Cows stopped chewing for a second. Sun, scarfed as in a heat haze, dimmed. The dead go on before us. They are sitting in God's house in comfort. We shall see them face to face. plain as lettering in the chapels, it was said, and for a second wives saw men of the explosion, larger than in life they managed. Gold as on a coin, or walking somehow from the sun towards them, one showing the eggs unbroken. So one of the things that Larkin and I had in common was Hull. Not that I come from there, but I was a student there, and then my wife and I stayed on until her early death in 1981. And so when I think of Larkin, I always think of Hull. He didn't like talking about poetry unless he had something to say and volunteered remarks. But he was of great help to me when I was putting my first book together. He gave my first book, its title. I was calling it something ridiculous, according to him, and he helped me put the poems in order. Terry Street was about 3 minutes' walk from Pearson Park, where Philip lived. And I rather fancy that he, out of one of the rooms at the back of his apartment, he would have been able to see the roofs of Terry Street. It's called a removal from Terry Street. On a squeaking cart, they pushed the usual stuff. A mattress, bed ends, cups, carpets, chairs, 4 paperback westerns. 2 whistling youths in surplus US Army battle jackets remove their sister's goods. Her husband follows, carrying on his shoulders the son whose mischief we are glad to see removed, and pushing, of all things, a lawnmower. There is no grass in Terry Street. The worms come up cacks in concrete yards in moonlight. That man, I wish him well. I wish him grass.
That was Removal from Terry Street by Douglas Dunn. And before that, Philip Larkin's The Explosion, which is also requested by Sarah Drury. Our most requested Philip Larkin poem has never been aired on Poetry Please because it contains some very strong language. You probably guessed that I'm talking about This Be the Verse, Larkin's famous warning about the unintended consequences of parenthood. Written in 1971, Larkin apparently asked that 1,000 girl guides should recite this poem at his funeral. I think he was joking. If you're not keen on swearing, you might like to mute your radio for the next couple of minutes, but if you don't, please listen beyond the famous first line to some great poetic imagery, particularly the line about misery deepening like a coastal shelf in the last stanza. This Be the Verse has been requested by Rick Jones, Caroline Salt and Richard Palmer.
They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra, just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time was soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself.
This Be the Verse by Philip Larkin. The poet Sean O'Brien grew up in Hull, surrounded by Larkin's ever-present influence, both as poet and as personality, and not just in the libraries that were his domain. But of course, Sean's latest collection, The Beautiful Librarians, cannot help but bring to mind Hull's best-known stamper of books.
I grew up reading Larkin's work from when I first got interested in poetry seriously when I was 14. I still find his work endlessly fascinating, whatever my reservations about his politics or other aspects of his doings. I was in a pub with my friend the poet Pete Didsbury, and Larkin appeared and insisted on buying us about 7 pints in 40 minutes, which made us completely incapable of attending to the poetry reading we'd come to hear. So I think the influence that Larkin has had for me is an interest in form, in a sense of the the elaborating music of a poem and the way in which it moves towards completeness. Larkin is a great ender of poems, and that combination of form and musicality has always interested me, as well as his profound pessimism, which of course is very appealing to anybody who grew up in Hull. I suppose Larkin is a kind of honorary god of librarians, at least among poets. He represents a kind of quiet, slightly repressed seriousness of a certain kind of public servant. But the librarians in my poem are female, and they're actually working not in a university library, but in the Central Library in Hull, where I used to go because I had such a great poetry stock, and also because all the librarians were so very beautiful. The beautiful librarians are dead. The fairly recent graduates who sat like Françoise Hardy's shampooed sisters with cardigans across their shoulders on quiet evenings at the issue desk, stamping books and never looking up at where I stood in adoration. Once I glimpsed the staff room where they smoked and, if the novels were correct, would speak of men. I still see the blue minis they would drive back to their flats around the park, to Blossom Dairy and red wine left over from a party I would never be a member of. Their rooms looked down on dimming avenues of lime. I shared the geography, but not the world it seemed they were establishing with such unfussy self-possession, nor the novels they were writing secretly that somehow turned to Mum's old stuff. Never to even brush in passing, yet nonetheless keep faith with them, the ice queens in their realms of gold. It passes time, that passes anyway. Book after book, I kept my word elsewhere, long after they were gone, and all the brilliant stock was sold.
That was Sean O'Brien reading his poem, The Beautiful Librarians. One of Larkin's defining features as a poet was his ability to powerfully evoke an England which, although unglamorous, is thoroughly recognisable. One of his admirers for this, and for many other reasons, is the poet Paul Farley.
I mean, I think I am a fan, or was a fan. It's very complicated business like in Larkin. And he's a very distinctive, loud poet in some ways. He gets on your breath. It's like garlic, you know. I showed up with another poet, Michael Simmons Roberts, at the Bryn Mawr Jones Library in Hull, where Larkin had worked, and we didn't really expect to get beyond the checkout gate of the library. We were unannounced, but they were really kind. They let us come up and take a look around Larkin's office, which has been left pretty much as was. And the librarian, Richard Hesseltine, was extremely kind and took lots of boxes out that contained things like Larkin's glasses, which we both held but didn't really want to try on. It felt like we were crossing some kind of line. And the toads that would have been on his desk, and the pictures of Guy the gorilla, and this huge desk that he worked at. I remember being really attracted to poems like Here, but I never set out to write an answer poem to Here, even though when you read them back to back, they're obviously in conversation with each other. Swerving east from rich industrial shadows and traffic all night north, swerving through fields too thin and thistled to be called meadows, and now and then a harsh named halt that shields workmen at dawn, swerving to solitude of skies and scarecrows, haystacks, hares and pheasants, and the widening river's slow presence, the piled gold clouds, the shining gull-marked mud, gathers to the surprise of a large town. Here domes and statues, spires and cranes cluster beside grain-scattered streets, barge-crowded water, and residents from raw estates, brought down the dead straight miles by stealing flat-faced trolleys, push through plate-glass swing doors to their desires. Cheap suits, red kitchenware, sharp shoes, iced lollies, electric mixers, toasters, washers, dryers. A cut-price crowd, urban yet simple, dwelling where only salesmen and relations come within a terminate and fishy-smelling pastoral of ships up streets, the slave museum, tattoo shops, consulates, grim head-scarfed wives, and out beyond its mortgaged half-built edges, fast-shadowed wheat fields, running high as hedges, isolate villages, where removed lives, loneliness clarifies. Here, silence stands like heat. Here leaves unnoticed thicken, hidden weeds flower, neglected waters quicken, luminously peopled air ascends. And past the poppies' bluish neutral distance ends the land suddenly beyond a beach of shapes and shingle. Here is unfenced existence, facing the sun, untalkative, out of reach. From a weekend first. One for the money, arrangements in green and grey from the window of an empty dining car. No takers for this burgundy today apart from me. I'll raise a weighted stem to my homeland scattering by. Be grateful for these easy on the eye, army and navy surplus camouflage colours that seem to mask all trace of life and industry. A draft for the hidden dead, our forefathers, the landfills of the mind where they turned in with the plush and orange peel of yesteryear, used up and entertained and put to bed at last. To this view where everything seems to turn on the middle distance, crematoria, multiplex way stations in the form of big sheds that house their promises of goods and sex. To the promise of a university town, its spires and playing fields. No border guards will board at this station. No shakedown relieve me of papers or contraband. This is England. Nobody will pull the cord on these thoughts, though the cutlery and glasses set for dinner are tinkling at a bend, a carriage full of ghosts taking their places. Now drink to slow outskirts, the colour wheels of 50 years collected in windows, to worlds of interiors, to credit deals with nothing to pay until next year, postcodes where water hardens then softens, where rows of streetlights become the dominant motif as day drains, and I see myself transposed into the dark, lifting my glass. Belief is one thing, though the dead have none of it. What would they make of me, this Pinot Noir on my expenses, time enough to write this on a virgin antimacassar? The miles of faint, the months of Sunday school, the gallons of free milk, all led to here. An empty dining car, a single fool reflected endlessly on the night air.
Larkin never married, and the poetic evidence suggests he wasn't a fan of marriage, but he certainly has an interesting relationship history. The poem Maiden Name, requested by Steve Hogg, is typical Larkin in its clever use of words and double meanings, but that doesn't disguise the palpable heartbreak infusing every line of the poem. Apparently, it was written for Winifred Arnott, with whom he had a brief relationship before she got engaged.
Marrying left your maiden name disused. Its 5 light sounds no longer mean your face, your voice, and all your variants of grace. For since you were so thankfully confused by law with someone else, you cannot be semantically the same as that young beauty. It was of her that these 2 words were used. Now it's a phrase applicable to no one, lying just where you left it, scattered through old lists, old programmes, a school prize or 2, packets of letters tied with tartan ribbon. Then is it scentless, weightless, strengthless, wholly untruthful? Try whispering it slowly. No, it means you. Or since you're past and gone, it means what we feel now about you then. How beautiful you were, and near and young, so vivid. You might still be there among those first few days, unfinger-marked again. So your old name shelters our faithfulness, instead of losing shape and meaning less with your depreciating luggage laden.
Maiden name. If you'd like to hear a poem on the programme, you can email us poetry.please@bbc.co.uk, tweet @bbcpoetryplease, or write to us at BBC Poetry Please, BS8 2LR. Unfortunately, we can't respond to everybody, but we'll try and let you know if your choice makes it on air. At Grass contains much of Larkin's trademark skillful observation. Old horses, their racing days long over, put out to grass. A poem about old age, although it's one of Larkin's earlier poems, written when he was still in his 20s. It's been requested by Gina Jolliffe and Anne Thompson. And with that, we'll leave Larkin for now. Goodbye.
The eye can hardly pick them out from the cold shade they shelter in, till wind distresses tail and mane. Then one crops grass and moves about, the other seeming to look on, and stands anonymous again. Yet 15 years ago, perhaps 24 distances sufficed to fable them, faint afternoons of cups and steaks and handicaps, whereby their names were artificed to inlay faded classic Junes. Silks at the start, against the sky numbers and parasols, outside squadrons of empty cars and heat and littered grass. Then the long cry hanging unhushed till it subside to stop press columns on the street. Do memories plague their ears like flies? They shake their heads. Dusk brims the shadows. Summer by summer all stole away, the starting gates, the crowds and cries, all but the unmolesting meadows. Almanacked, their names live. They have slipped, their names, and stand at ease, or gallop for what must be joy, and not a field-glass sees them home, or curious stopwatch prophecies. Only the groom and the groom's boy, with bridles in the evening come.